tuned in to The Andrew Lawton Show.
We have been speaking at great length over recent weeks about the taking down of statues, the vandalizing of statues, the denaming of buildings, schools, anything and everything that is named after or honors a person in history seems to be fair game. People whose greatest sin, perhaps their only sin, is living in an era that is not the current one, are finding themselves canceled posthumously by the mob. The one of these that has always disturbed me more than the others is John A. Macdonald. I've talked about him at great length. He's a man for whom history has, I think, a very favorable legacy and a very positive legacy. Whatever the differences are between the 19th century and the 21st century, John A. Macdonald was a beacon of progress, and he held Confederation together against the odds, and the Canada we have today is in no small part due to his efforts back in the 1860s and beyond. And when John A. Macdonald is targeted by the mob, it is particularly disingenuous that a country that affords people the right to speak their mind was founded by the guy they're speaking their mind to criticize. And there was a display on the weekend in Kingston on Friday morning in which the city took down the statue of John A. Macdonald, not just the former Prime Minister of Canada, but also a former Member of Parliament for Kingston. And in the face of this, two men stood out. Men who served this country wearing some military insignia, holding Canadian flags, taking a stand for John A. Macdonald at his feet. A minority display in Canada, given the landscape of these things, but one that stands out all the more. One of these men, Gordon Ohlke, is a town councillor in nearby Leeds and Thousand Islands. He joins me now. Gordon, it's good to talk to you. Thanks for coming on today.
Thank you.
So why did you decide to put on your old uniform, carry the flag, and stand at Sir John A. Macdonald's feet the way you did?
Well, let me be clear about my order of dress. It's not a uniform because I retired from the Army in 2013. I'm no longer entitled to wear a Canadian Army uniform, but there are certain standards we are, as veterans, encouraged to wear at various times, which is your old regimental beret with cap badge, the decorations you were awarded for service, and that's really the only guideline. So I stood as someone who was a soldier at one time. And to answer your other question, my friend and I just thought we should do something. We thought we should stand and defend Sir John in some way and defend our own heritage in some way, not denying that there was anything that should not be corrected, that there were not issues that needed to be addressed. But I don't think one should throw the baby out with the bathwater all the time, which seems to be the trend.
It's worth noting that Sir John does not only have a significant place in the history of Canada, but in Kingston specifically. In Kingston, he's a local hero as much as he is a national hero. And again, all of that seems insignificant to these people petitioning to have these sorts of statues taken down.
Well, I think there's been a failure in this country in the teaching of history. I'm not sure they teach any history anymore. I'm old enough to remember the grade 13 history I took, which was essentially European history, which taught me a lot of things which have stood me in very good stead in my career, where I went around the world and dealt with other cultures. And we took quite, in those days, quite comprehensive history in terms of the sense of development of constitutions and the progress of society, you know, from the Dark Ages or from the classical era up to our present time. That all seems to have gone, and people follow slogans and fads now and become very emotional about things that are represented to them out of context. And that seems to be a big problem in our society, which I'm not sure how they're going to address.
A lot of the thrust behind this has been ostensibly, or at least purportedly, under the auspices of reconciliation, but there isn't really any reconciliation taking place when people go after statues. And you had said when we were corresponding earlier and setting this up that it's an inanimate object. No one's interests are served by its removal.
Well, what I heard around me in the crowd I was taunted. I was shadowed. Um, I heard things like, "We've just started. Watch and see what we do next. This is just the beginning." I heard one woman speaking on a cell phone. I didn't hear the other end of the conversation, of course. And it may just have been emotional blather of the moment. But I heard this woman speaking on the cell phone. "We should take that plaque they're taking down now and put it on Sir John A.'s costume, or Macdonald's coffin. Now, my family happens to be buried 5 generations within about 40 meters of where Sir John is buried. And I'm wondering about future vandalism, future desecration." Now, there was that one flash of someone momentarily, even if they weren't serious, did entertain the idea of desecrating Macdonald's burial site. But I was confronted by a young woman who had a coterie of people around her, about 4 or 5 people around her. And she was very in my face. And she tried to say I was muddled. And, you know, obviously I'm an older man. She tried to say I was muddled. And it was one of those social justice warrior types. No matter what you say, it's because of your male white privilege and all this kind of stuff. You don't understand. You can't understand. And she became rather shrill. And then a police constable came to intervene. And the police constable, female, told her, "You know, this is enough for now. You need to back away from this gentleman." I intervened with the police constable. I said, "No, that's fine. I would like to hear what she has to say." And she seems to need to have to say something to me. And the constable left. And so the lady went on, and eventually she used the word white supremacist at me. And then she tried to back away from it. But I have the friend who stood with me on the monument actually heard it and said, no, both Gordon and I are trained listeners in our former professions, and we heard you. I heard her. And one of her friends who was with her backed off and said, "Well, I heard white supreme, but I didn't hear the ending." So she and her friends recoiled very quickly after that. But there were things like that going on.
But, I mean, that speaks to the level of polarization that has been injected into this, undeservingly so, that you standing up for a Canadian hero, a Canadian historic figure at the very least, at all ends up in the same breath as white supremacy. I mean, backtracking or not, that is even part of the discussion now, and that I would say that's probably not a rarity in this, is a sign of just, I think, how devoid of sense and historic knowledge a lot of these people that are leading the charge on this really are.
I'm not sure what's actually behind it. I think the thing that disturbed me the most is my sense that the council was intimidated. There was a lot of couching of threats behind some of the presentations, in that, you know, the people around the monument now are actually protecting it. The sense was, if you don't do what we want, another gang will turn up and there'll be violence and they'll take it down. And I've sent you some documents, perhaps you've just seen them, where you can see this reflected in what city staff and councillors reacted to. So I'm wondering, you know, and there was a local poll taken, and about 92% of the people who responded were in favor of keeping the statue, perhaps with some embellishments in terms of contextualizing history and artwork and things. But the majority of people around here would seem to want to keep the statue.
I want to ask about your military service, if I can, Gordon, because when you stand out there and are representing yourself as a veteran, you are someone that has done more to stand up for Canada and Canadian values, I would argue, than a lot of the people that seem to be behind this push to take down the name of John A. Macdonald and take down his statues. And I was wondering just how you'd respond to that. And I know that a lot of people that I've spoken to who have service backgrounds are very humble about it, but at the same time, you've done more, I think, to stand up for Canada and Canadian values than a lot of these people that were cheering for the statue's removal.
Well, the first thing I would say is that they have every right to do that. And as a soldier, it was part of my duties to defend their right to do that. I don't happen to agree with what they're doing, but they have the right to do it. And members of the forces are sworn to protect that right. So in that regard, I don't mind that they were doing what they were doing. I mind that City Council appeared to have loaded their special working group with people who would be negative, and that they took a coward's way out. I think City Council should have gone with the first option they had, which was to keep the statue in its place, perhaps modify the pedestal somewhat. That would be subject to negotiation, and then add thematic items to give it context and to show respect for the other culture that seems to be stressed. Then there was the other option of taking it down and just stashing it away and whatever. They came up with a third option, which was essentially the second option with a few frills. It was a kind of a sneaky way to show that they were catering to the people like me who wanted to keep the statue, but they really had no intention of doing it. And I think it's a giving way to fear. Wherever they would try to put it up again, whether in its original place or someplace else, the same sort of encampment would occur probably. And I think they're afraid of that. And then they were afraid, I think, of the veiled threat that if we didn't do what this group wanted, another group much less friendly would turn up and take it into their own hands. Well, I also sent an email to the mayor asking for a refund of my taxes for the amount that was paid to the city police. If they're not there to protect me, what do we have them for? Or city property.
Yeah, and the city is no better than so many of the vandals who have gone around destroying and defacing these statues. The difference is that the city has, of course, the backing of being a government when it does this. But the result of it is the same, which is that a statue that has been there for years taken away because of what I would probably say is a minority view among Canadians.
I agree with you. The other thing about that statue, and this is fairly personal and really far removed from my military service, which is what you started asking me about. When I was small, about 3.5, 4, my family was from Kingston. My parents had me there visiting older relatives. And I asked my parents, who was the man standing on the wall with all the cannons? And they explained to me who Sir John A Macdonald was. And my military career took me all over the world and frequently back to Kingston, but wherever I was, that was a landmark to me. That statue meant something to me. Now, my great-grandfather was a businessman in Kingston at the time that statue was put up. And, you know, a lot of people donated $1, and people think that's nothing nowadays, but $1 was the average man's daily wage in 1895. And I believe that statue was raised by public subscription. So there's a sentiment there that ties back to my family, and I'm sure many other people in Kingston itself. And for that reason, I thought I should stand in front of it, as well as, you know, my own ideology, I suppose.
What's been the response since then? Because I've had a number of people since I think it was the Canadian Press took a photo of you and your friend there standing with your flags and your berets. I've had a number of people send this, knowing I've been covering this, and I'm curious what you found in the way of response to this, if anything.
Similar responses. I don't use Twitter, but you know, I can see it on my email. And one of the journalists put up a presentation on it, and there was a lot of responses to it. One person accused us of being false veterans because we weren't old enough to be in World War II or Korea. Well, that's true. But I did serve in Bosnia and Afghanistan. My friend never made any pretense of that. He was a reservist in the 1970s, but maintains an interest in contact with his old regiment. So he had his beret and blazer crest. But the response was actually quite heartwarming, really, overall. And you know, my friends, of course, but many people I didn't know had responded to the journalist's tweet, and it was very, very heartwarming, really. I didn't feel I was alone, put it that way.
Well, you certainly won't, and I must say, however you would characterize your display, I never would have thought that standing with a Canadian flag in front of a statue of Canada's first Prime Minister would be an act of protest in a way, but here we are, and that's, in and of itself, quite a dark development in this country.
Well, I hope the next time someone tries to do that, that other people stand in front of that statue, wherever it is, and actually force a government to change. If we have to do the same tactics to preserve our nation that people who seem keen to disestablish our nation are using, well, maybe we should. If that's polarizing, well, I think we're already polarized. And I think if there is an average Canadian, they're probably reticent, they're probably very polite, they're probably hardworking, they're probably more worried about their family at any one time than anything else. And when you have something like this, I believe I believe that the crowd around that was opposed to the statue wanted it down. I believe a lot of them was financed by the CERB, quite frankly. And well, there you go. You see, it was also timed on a date and time when most people were getting ready for work, if not on their way to work. If they tried to pull it down on a Saturday or Sunday, there might have been a different story.
Very well said. Well, I appreciate you taking a stand, and also I greatly appreciate your service for this country. Gordon Ohlke, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.